Hey everyone, hope you guys are enjoying Monster Hunter in whichever faction you're choosing to play it as. And today I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion regarding what kind of boosted up versions of normal monsters or even elder dragons we might end up getting in the next mainline game. Remember that Capcom has decided to kind of twist the wording around in the most recent entries whenever they decide to introduce a more powerful version of the same monsters. Previously, of course, we had the tempered state, we had arch tempered monsters, and of course Sunbreak we ended up getting risen elders and anomaly monsters. They kind of divided the wording in two separate factions. Lore wise, they end up making sense of both things in both formats, but at the end of the day, whenever you break it all down, what you end up having is just a more boosted version of that same monster. Not necessarily being tied to normal, medium, or hard difficulty, or even master rank or G rank, but ultimately just, more powerful versions flat out. This is the highest difficulty that you'll be able to find, and players usually end up expecting not just, of course, now a more different engagement with, new mechanics specifically added for those monsters, maybe a different look for those monsters like we got to see with arch-tempered monsters, and of course, risen elders. But then, of course, brand new abilities as well. Those monsters can pull off different techniques, maybe new combo attacks that simply didn't necessarily have before. And I'm wondering what Capcom is going to choose and opt in to do this time around with their brand new powered up states. Remember that with tempered monsters, basically every single monsters except a couple of handful of them, I believe like Great Jagras, Gyros, those event ones like Leshen and Ancient Leshen simply weren't available to that, but then pretty much every other monster was. Maybe Elatrion was or Fatalis wasn't, but most of the monsters had a temper state, and then when it came to arch tempered, pretty much all of the other ones did as well. Whatever had a temper, they had an arch temper state, and they were a little bit more unique in that regard. When it came to anomaly monsters, we know that pretty much all of them except elder dragons, which of course ended up getting the risen version, and I believe it was Vale Mitsutune and Lucent Nargacuga were the only two normal monsters that were excluded from being able to beat Anomaly in Rise and Sunbreak. So I'm wondering, of course, just story-wise, and this is something that is kind of hard to predict because we wouldn't necessarily know the story elements of what the next mainline Monster Hunter game would be, as to what story factions or ways they will try to give us a more powerful version of those monsters, but specifically in which way they would try to handle it like they did before. Would they give us a tempered version format where it's pretty much just a raw power boost across the board for each and every single one of the monsters without new moves or any sort of special changes? Of course, not even brand new armor sets, which is something that a lot of people were complaining about when it came to Rise. They wanted anomaly monsters to give you brand new armor sets. Yes, of course, those monsters are more powerful, therefore they should be able to give you more powerful versions of them. In their very own unique ways, anomaly monsters did end up giving you access to more boosted versions of those armors through the anomaly, crafting system, which ended up kind of like giving you another RNG option to not only roll in for extra decoration slots, but also brand new skills being added into every piece of armor. So I do think in that regard, anomaly investigation monsters did end up giving us a better option, not necessarily a brand new armor set. So, you would imagine that a normal, new powerful version, a new anomaly monster will give you a brand new armor set instead of just a normal Rathalos or a normal anomaly Rathalos. You end up getting a different version, more powered up version of that armor set with more decoration slots, better skill versions, and all of that. But instead, they ended up just giving us the RNG options to be able to craft in deco slots based on RNG, of course, or basically end up getting new tiers of different skills that you simply didn't have available before. So I do wonder what they're going to try to do at the very least for base monsters, what they choose to do opt in that regard. And I think personally that the anomaly format that they chose originally would go a long way. But I do wonder if they're going to try to include elder dragons in that regard. Arch temper monsters didn't really have any like clarifiers or significant importance with elder dragons. They were just, more powerful versions of those monsters already, but risen elders ended up being kind of like their very own unique version. They ended up being treated as variants. They ended up being their very own thing in their own format. And I think because of that, Capcom would like to opt into some sort of system going forward into the future. Not necessarily that they're going to bring in risen elder dragons going forward, but because they can classify risen elder dragons or risen Chameleos or risen Kushala Daora or risen Teostra as his very own variant, which is not something that they did with arch-tempered monsters. Remember, those were just treated as normal, more powerful. They were arch-tempered, that was their classification, but they weren't treated as their very own variant for whatever reason. This time around, Capcom wants to up those numbers for those monsters. They give them a little bit of a more unique look, a couple of brand new unique skills or skill combinations in their own attacks, and next thing you know, you end up getting a brand new monster. In their eyes, they try to boost those numbers as much as possible. Remember that so many of the monsters that we have seen being added, specifically to Sunbreak, were variants in such species. They weren't necessarily a brand new monster. So I think that is probably going to be the best format going forward, at the very least in Capcom's eyes, to see if they try to do whatever new powered up version of monsters that they do, specifically when it comes to elder dragons. Provide them a little bit more powerful version, which of course we should be able to expect when it comes to endgame, especially when it comes to the second version of the DLC of whatever the next mainline Monster Hunter game would be. Whatever the next expansion would be to that is probably something that they're going to try to opt into that. And I do have to wonder, since the production value of the next mainline game would be one that has been a relatively long time. If I remember correctly, Monster Hunter World released back in 2018, early 2018 at that. By the time this video goes live, we're still at the back end of 2023. So it's essentially been over 5 years. And we, of course, presume the next mainline game to be launching in 2024. So the production value of this game has been one of almost over 5 years at this point in time. And because of that, I do have to wonder if more expansions would be in line, in tow, post-launch. Usually Monster Hunter games end up getting one expansion, one major extension, the G rank update, what we used to call it back in the 3DS, PSP days or whatever. And then that was pretty much it. World ended up getting their Iceborne, Rise ended up getting a Sunbreak, but I do wonder if getting another update out there would go a long way, and how players would actually, how interested will players be if they decide to do multiple different updates, multiple expansions to just the base game, and kind of like repurpose a lot of the content, but also give you a lot of that extra, difficulty that a lot of players are hoping for. One of my biggest criticisms when it came to anomaly investigations, and specifically special investigation quests, was just the amount of people who basically had access to it. You needed to be anomaly investigation level 300. You needed to be able to unlock that quest. You needed to finish that quest at level 300 with other players, not just by yourself, and then be able to get that special investigation version of that quest and then do it all over again. How many players reached out and did, let's say, more than 5 special investigation quests that they ended up unlocking themselves for themselves? My answer to that would be probably less than 5%. Even I'm talking about just the players who ended up reaching endgame. Forget everyone who decided to pick up the 16, 17 million people who ended up buying Rise and Sunbreak together on all platforms across the world. I would imagine even less than 1 to 2% of those players ended up seeing those special investigations. And for that reason alone, I would expect Capcom to reconsider what they think of like endgame content, but more importantly, how they treat these powered up versions of anomaly investigations, whether it is temper monsters, arch temper monsters, or even risen elders, which I would actually be willing to bet that they'll consider just normal versions of monsters going forward. Ended up getting that sort of like variant version, but we understand that is a different classified version of themselves, which is something that we ended up seeing in previous games. And like deviants, remember that deviant monsters were pretty much designated as their own version. They were not necessarily the traditional version of that monster, there was plenty of them already. They had their own names, they had their own look, they had their own unique abilities, unique attacks. Some of them even had new elements. So at the end of the day, providing some of those monsters their own unique things, kind of like what they ended up doing with elders, would be really interesting for them to be able to see. And at the end of the day, I just do hope that they end up doing something interesting for just normal monsters, not necessarily elders at all times. But I do want to hear your guys' opinions on this. Do let me know in the comments what you would like for them to do going forward regarding just the powered up versions. Do Arch Tempers come back? Do Risen Elders come back? Do Deviants come back? What would you hope for them to do instead of what the typical format has been, of just a base, more powerful version of a monster with just some slight recoloring and calling it a day? If you're brand new to my channel, though, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.